Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Maseches Sukkah Daf Mem Vez is the last daf in the third parak of the Masechta, Parak Lo V'Gazel. It contains one Mishnah before ending the parak and then beginning the next parak, Lo V'Arava, with a Mishnah. So from the beginning of the daf until the Mishnah discusses halacha, which we have seen the name of Rabbi Yosi, that if you make a mistake and you're Machal Shabbos by accident because you were involved in a mitzvah, you do not have to bring a carbon chatos. The Gemara will limit that and discuss contradictions to that. Then we get to the Mishnah, which discusses the obligation of women and children in the halacha of taking the arba minim, the lulav and the other of the four species. And the Gemara will describe the chiyuvim of children through various different mitzvahs when they reach the age to be able to do each of those mitzvahs. So we begin the daf. We've seen halacha. We basically said in our last Mishnah that if somebody's involved in doing a mitzvah and he accidentally is Machal Shabbos, he doesn't have to bring a Karban Chatas. Karban Chatas is only brought if you were irresponsible about it. So Gemara first limits this and then shows a contradiction to it. Abaye says this is limited to a situation in which you were not Yotze the mitzvah yet. If you were Yotze the mitzvah already and then you're Machal Shabbos, that doesn't count as an excuse. You do have to bring a Karban Chatas. Now, specifically here, we're discussing the mitzvah of Lulav and Esrog. So the Gemara asks right away, as soon as he picks up the Lulav and Esrog, he's Yotze the mitzvah. How could he carry it in Rosh Hashanah, which is specifically the case that Brisi was referring to, where he carried the Lulav and Esrog in Rosh Hashanah? How could he violate that without having been Yotze already? The whole case doesn't exist according to Abaye. Gemara gives two answers. Abaye says he picked it up upside down, and therefore he wasn't Yotze the mitzvah. You're only Yotze if you carry it right side up, the way it grows. Rava says he's talking about where he picked it up holding it in a kli. He wasn't holding it in his hands. Gemara asks right away. Rava said, just recently, we've seen that. Rava said if you hold the lulav through a handkerchief, that's fine. So holding it in a kli is not a problem. He says lakicha adei davar acher is called holding it. So Gemara answers it's different. If he's holding it through a cloth, he's holding it in order to show honor to the four species. There he is Yotze. Here he's holding it in a kli, in another object that's showing dishonor to the four species. He's not Yotze. Now, the Gemara's next limitation of Rabbi Yosi's halacha is that if he didn't do the mitzvah that he wanted to do at all, even through his violating the Yisr, he still didn't accomplish the mitzvah. There could be, the Gemara will say not so, but could be you do violate the Yisr, and you do have to bring a Karban Chatas. So the Gemara brings, in the case of somebody who was eating a oilas ha'oif, he was eating a Karban oila, which was a bird. Now the halachas are not allowed to eat that, but he thought it was a chatas ha'oif. He thought it was a Karban Chatas from a bird. That was a mitzvah to eat. So he made a mistake. He ate kachim. He's not allowed to eat. That's a iser karis. He has to bring a Karban Chatas for that. So the Gemara quotes that Rav Yosi says that in a situation like that, because he was trying to eat a Karban Chatas, which is a mitzvah to eat, he doesn't have to bring a carbon for his mistake, because he was trying to do a mitzvah. So Gemara says, what's a chedesh? How's that different in the case of the lulav? Gemara says it's different because here he never actually did a mitzvah. In the case of the lulav, at least he did the mitzvah of the lulav. Here he just ate a Karban Chatas. Here he just ate a Karban Oila. He never actually did any mitzvah of eating Karban Chatas. Gemara has another similar case. Gemara says if somebody brings a Karban Tamid on Shabbos, but it's a Balmum, and he hadn't checked it, it had not been checked for a mum, and he slaughtered a Karban Chatas on Shabbos. Now, slaughtering an animal is an Issa Daraisa. If you're bringing a Karban Tamid, then it's a mitzvah. So here he thought he was doing a mitzvah, instead he was doing an Isser. So the Gemara says, what's the difference between the two cases over here? How come, in the case of the person who accidentally ate a Karban Oila, we say he does not have to bring a Karban Chatas, but here the halacha is that he does have to bring a Karban Chatas? So the Gemara answers that here the situation was where he took from a corral of unchecked animals, and it was his fault. He should have checked where he's taking the animal from. He's responsible to take it from the right place, and therefore he's responsible for it, and he violates the Yisra and has to bring a Karban Chatas. Now we get to the next Mishnah, which discusses the halacha of a woman and a child in the four minim. Now about a woman, we know she's not obligated in the mitzvah of arba minim. She's allowed to do it, but she's not obligated in it. So Gemara says that it's not muktzah for her. She's allowed to take the lulav from her husband and from her son and put it into water. Gemara explains you may have thought it's muktzah because it's not a mitzvah object for her. It has no use for her. The Gemara answers, no, since it has a use for somebody, so it's considered to be a useful object. It's still considered to be a kli. It's considered to be a functional object, and therefore it is not mukta, even though for her specifically it doesn't have a function. So now the Gemara, the end of the Mishnah says that she's allowed to put it in water. Now, what type of water is she allowed to put it into? So on Shabbos is very restrictive. She's only allowed to put it back in the water that it was in before. On Yom Tov, she's allowed to add water to the already existing water. And on Chol Moed, you're even allowed to put it in a whole new set of water. The reason of all these things is considered a tircha to put plants into water on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Okay, now the Gemara... the last line in the Mishnah, before the Gemara, the last line is about a child. It says when he's old enough to shake the lulav, then he's chayiv in the mitzvah of lulav. Now the Gemara quotes a brisa, which gives us the time at which children become obligated in various different mitzvahs. So first of all, it says when he's old enough to take the lulav, he's obligated. When he's old enough to shake the lulav, he's obligated in the mitzvah of lulav. When he's old enough to put on tzitzis properly, he has to have tzitzis. When he's old enough to protect his tefillin and not bring it into the bathroom, his father should buy him tefillin. When he's old enough to speak, his father should teach him Torah and Shema. The Torah, the Gemara says, is Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe, and Shema is the first pasuk of Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Continuing the brisa, when he's old enough to guard his body from becoming tamei, from the various tumas that affect the body, tumas ol, tumas meis, and various different things like that. So from that point, if he touched taharis, if he touched truma, you could assume that it's tahar and that his body was a tahar. And you could ask him and trust what he says. That's only if he touched it with his body. If he touched it with his hands, it's different because hands are much more likely to become tamei. We have a gzeira that hands are called shniyos l'tuma unless they were washed in netilas yadayim and he was careful with them afterwards. So once he's old enough to do that, to wash netilas yadayim properly and to guard his hands and make sure they don't become tamei again afterwards, then we do trust him, and even if he touched taharis with his hands, we will not consider it to be tamei. Now, if he may have been matamei something in Rosh Hashanah or Rosh Hashanah, so generally the halacha is that a suffix, we're not sure if something became tamei in Rosh Hashanah, we assume it's tahar, in Rosh Hashanah we assume it's tamei. With this child, he has to be old enough for us to be able to ask him, and he'll answer, yes, I touched it, no, I didn't touch it, yes, it became tamei, no, it didn't become tamei, or I don't know. If he says, I don't know, then it's considered a suffix, and we follow the rules of suffix tumah in Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Hashanah. Next halacha, the brisa says, is if he's old enough, he's a kohen, and he's old enough to do berachas kahanim, to properly do a berachas kahanim, then you can give him truma at the granary. Generally, the halacha is that you do not give truma in a granary to a child because it's a bizayin to the truma. It looks like he's going to be metamei it. Instead, you send it to their homes. However, for when he's old enough to do berachas kahanim, people all know he's a gadol, and therefore they assume that he is old enough to be careful in the halachas of tahara, and therefore you are allowed to give it to him even at the granary. Now, as far as shechita, the Gemara says a katan who knows how to shecht is allowed to shecht, and Rav Huna adds as long as a gadol, an adult, is standing over him watching, making sure he does it properly, and he keeps all the halachas of shechita. Now the Gemara discusses when is he old enough that his waste matter is considered to be a problem to say a bracha or to say Shema near it, and you have to go away from it in order to say Dvarim Shebikdusha. So the Gemara says that's when he's old enough to eat a kizayis, an olive size of any type of bread made from any of the 5 grains. Then his waste material is problematic, both liquid and solid wastes. Now the Gemara says he has to eat it fast enough, though. If he eats 1 crumb a week, that doesn't count. It has to be that he eats kizayis within a kidei achilas pas. That's the time it takes to eat half a loaf of bread, 6 to 8 minutes. Machlokas rishonim. Now the Gemara brings the Gemara says if he's an adult, he's already grown up, then even if he can't properly eat grain in that time, you have to stay away from his waste material when saying Dvarim Shebikdusha, and that's learned out of the pasuk of Yosef Das, Yosef Machov. The smarter he is, the more problematic his issues are. Now, as far as eating a carbon Pesach for a child, the Gemara brings a machlokas here. Tanakama says he has to be old enough to eat a kizayis of roasted meat, and that's because it says ish lefi achla in the pasuk, and Rebbe says he has to be able to choose to separate, to distinguish between food and stones. If you give him a stone and he throws it away, you give him a nut and he keeps it, then he's old enough for that. That concludes Parak Lulav Gazel. Now we begin Parak Lulav Rava with a Mishnah. We'll do just the Mishnah. The Mishnah discusses the halachas of when different mitzvahs of Sukkot, how many days they apply. So you'll see some things apply 5, 6, 7, or 8 days. And the Mishnah explains some of it, but not all of it. We'll explain them all. So lulav, the mitzvah of lulav, that's the 4 species, that applies either 6 or 7 days. The Gemara explains that in most of Yerushalayim, you did not do it on Shabbos unless Shabbos was the first day of Yom Tov. So if Shabbos was the first day of Yom Tov, then you would do it for 7 days because you did it all 7 days, including Shabbos, which was the first day. If Shabbos was a different day of Yom Tov, then you lost a day. You didn't do it Shabbos, therefore you only took it 6 days. Arava, this is the mitzvah of circling the Mizbeach with the Aravos in the Beis HaMikdash. That is the same halacha. That is also only Doche Shabbos. If Shabbos falls out one particular day of the Yom Tov, that's Hoshana Rabbah, the 7th day. The Gemara will explain why. And therefore, again, if Hoshana Rabbah is on a Shabbos, then it is performed that mitzvah for 7 days. Otherwise, it's only done for 6 days. Now, saying Hol Hallel, that's 8 days, because that includes all 7 days of Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres. The mitzvah of Simcha, the special mitzvah to have meat and wine and rejoice, that's again all 8 days, 7 days of Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres. Sitting in the Sukkah applies for 7 days. Nisach HaMayim, pouring water on the Mizbeach, is a special avodah that went for 7 days. Now the drawing of the water the night before and the special Simchas Beis Eva that they made, that was either 5 or 6 days. Why is that? It was not done the first night of Yom Tov. It was performed the night before the service, so therefore it would be the night of each day, the night preceding each day. It was not done the first day of Yom Tov, and it was not done Friday night. So if those two came out the same day, then you had 6 days left. If they came out at different days, then you only had 5 days. Now the Mishnah describes how the Arba Minim were taken on Shabbos. The Mishnah says that everybody would bring their Aravos to the Beis HaMikdash before Yom Tov, if Yom Tov came out on a Shabbos. And they would set it up, they would give it to the Chazanim, that's the Shemashim, the Gabbais, and they would set it up on the benches that were in the covered area for people to sit. Now, elderly people would put it in a special room because they could not crush and push their way through the crowd and be able to access their lulavim over there. Okay, now, the Gemara says that there was a problem, is that nobody was able to get specifically their own lulav, and therefore they taught them, say that whoever gets your lulav, that you're giving to him as a gift. Now after a while, people pushing and shoving to get to their lulavim ended up causing a dangerous situation, and therefore they canceled this procedure and had said everybody should take the lulav and esrog in their own house on Shabbos.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.